When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: Eddie's funeral. User: D260. Posted April 12, 1998.
The funeral home smelled like lilies and cheap cologne, and I wasn't sure what to expect when I walked in, so the distraction was kinda nice. You see, I hadn't seen most of the guys in years. Time has a way of scattering people, pulling them down different roads until all that's left is a collection of names you remember more than faces. But today, we were all here in our cheap suits and ties for Eddie. At least, those of us left. They said it was natural causes. A heart attack in his sleep. No mystery to it, and I guess that's just the age we're reaching. And I better get used to catching up with my old friends with that smell. I spent most of the service staring at the coffin, lost in my own thoughts, but it wasn't just Eddie I was thinking about. It was all of us. The last time we had all been together, not just in the same room, but really together, was a couple of weeks before Billy left for boot camp. Come to think of it, that was the last time I ever saw Billy too. He died in a helicopter training exercise a couple of years later after surviving 2 tours in Vietnam. It's crazy, man. You make it that far and you die at home. Anyway, that summer after high school, we went camping out in the woods off Blackwater Creek. It was the kind of place where kids in our town always used to go when they wanted to drink warm beer and tell bullshit stories about the girls they never really hooked up with. Well, I don't even remember whose idea it was, but it felt like the last chance to do something before life pulled us apart. Eddie, Billy, Sean, me, and Dex, 5 dumb kids with a couple of tents, a few cases of Schlitz, and a long summer weekend ahead of us. The first night started like we had planned. We built a fire, burned a couple of hot dogs on sticks, laughed until we couldn't breathe. Billy kept talking about how he was ready to go kill some motherfuckers for our freedom, but we could all hear the nerves in his voice. Eddie passed out first, half a beer still in his hand. Dex followed not long after. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but the fire had burned down to embers and the woods were different. Too still. You ever wake up somewhere and just know something's wrong? That's how it felt. Then I heard it, chanting. It was faint at first, carried on the wind like a half-remembered song, but the longer I listened, the more I realized it wasn't just some distant echo. It was coming from somewhere nearby. I sat up, my pulse hammering hard, and shook Billy awake. "You hear that?" I whispered. He nodded. Billy scrambled over to Eddie and Dex and made them come listen too, and for a long moment, none of us spoke. We just sat there, eyes wide, the sound of low voices drifting through the night to the rise and fall of a rhythm that didn't sound like English. Hell, we might just be some dumb hillbilly kids, but it didn't sound like any language I'd ever heard. Sean wanted to check it out. Dex shook his head, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. It's probably just some weirdos in the woods. Yeah, then let's see what kind of weirdos are out here. I don't know why we agreed. Maybe because Billy was leaving soon and we felt like we owed him a little adventure. Maybe because none of us wanted to be the first to say no. So we grabbed the flashlights and set off in the direction of the chanting. We walked maybe 50 yards. No sign of anyone anywhere. No light, no movement, nothing. And yet the sound had been so close. "Fuck this," Dex muttered. "I'm going back to sleep." By the time we got back to the campsite, the chanting had stopped. We sat around for a while, waiting to hear it again, but the night had faded back into silence, like nothing had ever happened. The next day, not a single one of us mentioned it. Instead, we spent our time fishing, swimming, acting like everything was normal, chugging warm beers with cold breakfast. But sometime that afternoon, Dex wandered off to take a leak, and he came back looking pale. You guys need to see this. Just past the tree line, maybe 30 feet from our tents, the ground was covered in footprints. Bare feet, dozens of them, some big, some small, and not a single one of them belonged to us. Eddie swore up and down it had to be a prank. Billy wanted to follow them, but after some arguing, we all agreed to just let it go. We didn't know what to say. What was there to say? So we just relit the fire, drank some more beer, and burnt more hot dogs. That night, it was like all of us knew something was going on, but no one would admit it. Yet, nobody dared leave the fire for the tents, and sure enough, the chanting returned. "Fuck this shit," Dex said. "Let's get the hell out of here now." The rest of us looked at each other, and almost simultaneously, in agreement, we followed Dex and started packing. We were home before the sun came up. Like I said, that was the last time I saw Billy, Eddie, Sean, and Dex. They all went their own ways, college, career, family, life kept moving. But over the years, every so often when I wake up and my house is too quiet, I swear I can still hear that chanting, that low, rhythmic murmur coming from somewhere just beyond the dark. The preacher's voice pulled me back into the present. He said something about Eddie being a good man, about the life he lived. I glanced around the room at his family and friends, and I saw Sean sitting in the front row, his hands folded in his lap. Dex was a few rows back, his arm around his wife's shoulder. I wonder if they have nights like I do, if they still hear those voices.
Subject: the basement door. User: Lost in Lex 12. Posted May 25th, 1997.
The worst part about moving has to be the packing and unpacking. The actual pick up and go part is easy in comparison. That's why I've been here in Lexington for 6 weeks now, and half my stuff is still in boxes. My clothes are too, come to think of it. 1 box for clean, 1 box for dirty. It works well enough, and I figure there's more than enough time to unpack properly. It's a nice little apartment, a 1-bedroom on the top floor of a 3-story building. There are only 2 downsides to the building, the first being that it's in a rough part of town. The second is also the strangest thing about this place. In fact, it's the reason I'm here at all. The door in the laundry room. During my move-in, Mr. Keene mentioned that laundry was down in the basement, but never actually bothered to show me. Instead, he recommended I take it all down to Chevy Chase Laundromat on Ashland. "They'll wash it for you just like your mama," is how he put it. I tried asking more about the machines in the basement, but he just waved his hand. Of course, as soon as he left, I headed for the stairs. When I got to the basement, I couldn't believe I was in the same place. The hallway's concrete floor was cracked and water-stained with deep furrows where it met the walls. I couldn't see any insects, but that may have been down to the flickering overhead light more than a lack of them. At the end of the hallway, a steel door hung ajar. At some point in the distant past, it had been haphazardly coated with cheap blue paint, but now the rust underneath it was starting to show through. I can see why he didn't want to show me around down here. I won't be telling Mom and Dad about this part. Inside the laundry room wasn't any better, barely lit by 2 narrow windows in the corner of the room. Below them were a dozen or so old paint cans haphazardly stacked alongside some old insulation. Along the same wall stood a Household Black & Decker washer-dryer set. No wonder he didn't want me to come down here, I thought. They're not charging for laundry. I wouldn't want anyone to know either. 3 of the 4 walls were crumbling concrete, featureless except for dust-lined cobwebs. Bizarrely, the 4th wall was plywood and stopped 2 inches short of the ceiling. In the middle of it was what looked like a hollow MDF door with a bright golden doorknob and a keyhole above it. Naturally, I tried opening it, but it was locked. Well, I thought, it's a nightmare, but free laundry is free laundry. As I was turning to leave, I thought I saw a light come on in the space above the plywood, but when I looked back, it was still dark. The first couple times I did my laundry, nothing very interesting happened. The 3rd time, though, that was strange. I threw my whites into the washer and dropped the lid with a satisfying clang before starting the cycle. Thing is, a second later, I thought I heard the clang again, but not from the machine in front of me. No, this sounded like it was coming from the other side of the plywood wall. I walked up to the door, listening as closely as I could for other sounds, but the rush of the washer made it hard to hear anything else. The nearer I got to the door, the more I held my breath, straining to hear. I plugged one ear and placed the other against the cold wood. The steady whoosh of the washer fell away, and I heard dimly what sounded like exactly the same sound coming from the other side. Have they divided the laundry room, I thought? Why? Again, I tried the doorknob, and again, it was locked. A week after that, I called Mr. Keene to see if he could recommend a mechanic in the city, and at the end of the conversation, I asked him about the basement door. "Hey, Mr. Keene, before you go, what's the story with that plywood wall and door in the laundry room? I was down there last week and thought I heard another washing machine on the other side." "I thought I told you to go to the Chevy," he said sharply. "They'll do it for you. You don't need to be going down there, Jeffrey." "With all due respect, sir," I said, "I'm quite capable of doing my own laundry, and it's considerably cheaper. Look, kid, if I could chain that door shut, I would, but the landlord won't allow it. We've got hard water. It'll ruin your clothes." "Okay, but what's on the other side of the door?" Nothing, he snapped, nothing. Cleaning products, tools, things that go missing when people with sticky fingers go snooping. Stay out of the basement and keep your hands off that door. I agreed I would and ended the conversation. He was lying through his teeth. I didn't know much, but I knew that. Whatever was in there wasn't cleaning supplies, and I was more curious than ever. Luckily for me, I'd been a curious kid who liked to learn how things work, including locks. The next week, on laundry day, I went back downstairs armed with a flathead screwdriver, pliers, and a box of bobby pins. I prodded at that cheap lock's pins until I heard the satisfying click of them giving way. With one final turn of the screwdriver, I unlocked the door and pushed it open. Just as I had suspected, there, on the other side, was another laundry room with a single washer and dryer on the far wall. Well, I had enough laundry for 2 machines, so I wasn't about to let this opportunity go to waste. I dragged my hamper through the door, tossed in the remaining clothes, and started the cycle. I leaned back against the washer, feeling very pleased with myself. Hard water my ass. The more I looked at the other laundry room, the less sense it made. Not just that they'd locked it away, but that it was exactly the same layout as the one on my side, except in reverse. If you stood on the paint cans of the first room and looked out the windows, you saw the rear parking lot, but I couldn't for the life of me think where the windows in this room faced, as the front of the building was all apartments. I brushed dirt and cobwebs off the window and peered out. My mind reeled. I was looking out on the same parking lot from exactly the same angle. This wasn't possible. I felt a headache starting between my eyes, sharp and hot. Looking out the windows made it worse, so I turned away. What the hell was going on? My stomach turned. I desperately didn't want to be sick downstairs. By the time I got back upstairs to my apartment, the feeling had passed along with the headache. While the pain was gone, the whole experience had drained me completely, and I fell asleep on the couch. I woke up later with a start, remembering my clothing was still downstairs in the 2 washers. Hoping I had caught them before they started to smell, I dashed back down to the laundry rooms, the wooden door thankfully still open. I collected my damp clothes from the far machine, making a point to avoid looking anywhere near the windows in the corner. Whatever was going on there was a tomorrow problem. After putting both loads into the dryer of my laundry room, I carefully closed the wooden door and picked up my lock-picking gear. It was a good thing Mr. Keene hadn't come by while I was out. He couldn't have proven it was me who did it, but really, did he have to? So that's the story up to now. I told all this to a coworker, Mike, who then told me about this board. He's a big X-Files guy and was obsessed with the window thing, especially after I told him I did a complete exterior check of the building and couldn't find any other basement windows. He desperately wants to come over and explore the other laundry room and whatever is beyond it. I'm not exactly sure what we're gonna find if we go back, but I have an idea.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.